of people ask me exactly what I bring with me on the road, okay, what my loadout is in this van, okay, and they want to know, they ask me what I eat, how I cook, what clothes I bring, how I keep warm, my sleeping bag, how I charge batteries, etc., etc. Okay, and the short answer that I give them is as little as possible. All right, and since this usually kind of piques their interest and we start talking more, all right, that usually turns into the long answer. I end up giving them the long answer, which is that stuff, okay, is... Well, the whole idea is to get away from stuff by doing this. If anybody who's watching this also spends time on the road like this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The whole idea of getting out and doing this is to get away from stuff. Okay, so liberate yourself from stuff. All right, because stuff, and particularly your goddamn box of wood, your house, all right, that people put so much importance on and they slave away decades at some heinous job to pay for, all right? Stuff, and particularly your house, to me, those are a buffer in between you and the real world, okay? The world at large and all the magic that's out there and the amazing things and people that are out there waiting for you, okay? Stuff is a buffer in between you and that, okay? It's like a wall. And the whole idea is to strip that shit away, all right, and expose yourself to all that and meet that head on, face value, in raw form as much as you can, okay? And I think another big part of that is, a part of this whole thing is, when you do that, you're also getting out from under the crushing burden of rent and mortgage and, again, some horrendous job, okay? And you're getting off of that insane hamster wheel and you're stepping off of that, and you can actually breathe for a moment, okay? And figure out your place and see what is out there in the world and what it presents to you, okay? That's huge. That's a huge part of this. And again, if you're on the road, if you've done this, you know exactly what I'm talking about, all right? And if you've hiked the Pacific Crest Trail or things like that, this is old news for you. But for a lot of people, this isn't old news, so that's why I'm talking about it. And I talk with a lot of people about this. And for most, I don't know what percentage, but for the vast majority of people in the world, this isn't common knowledge, okay? This is kind of a new thing for them, and they love talking about it. So, and again, if this, I think this is familiar, okay? This is familiar stuff for another reason, all right? Because essentially what we're talking about, I think obviously, is the monastic path, the ascetic path, all right? And which is obviously, it is the same thing. It's the ascetic ideal is to strip away the comforts of the world that are around you and fully expose yourself to the world at face value, okay? And that's really what we're doing here, okay? Now, obviously, it's not the same. Being in a van on the road isn't quite as extreme. It's not the same thing as some of these guys, like, for example, Saint Simeon, all right, who lived on top of tippy top of a pillar for 37 years, okay? We're not in the same league as those guys, all right? But it is a step in the right direction, being in a van on the road, okay? It is still a significant amount of exposure, okay? And it is a hell of a lot more exposure, guaranteed, than working some hellish job, okay, to pay your crushing $2,500 a month rent or mortgage so you can sit in your goddamn box of wood on your ass watching Netflix, all right? So being in a van on the road, you're a hell of a lot farther ahead than any of those guys, all right? So it's definitely recommendable, definitely beneficial. So that's what's going on. That's the long answer, and that's what I tell people, all right? On this trip, I have been on the road. I left my home base in Washington. To my shame, my home base is Washington State. I'm working on remedying that. I'm trying to sell my place up there and move to, maybe around Yosemite or Moab or some Joshua Tree, some amazing place. If anybody has any suggestions, I'm all ears. Okay, some awesome place that they live. But for now, I'm in Washington, much where my base is, and I don't live there. I rent my place out. I am in my van most of the time doing this, or I am in Mexico, all right, or some other place, usually Mexico. And I need to make a video about Mexico where I do go down there because it's also amazing. So keep an eye out for a video about that, okay? But for now, I left my base in Washington a month and a half ago, and I went to Yosemite, and then I went to over the mountains to Mount Whitney, Whitney Portal area, and then I was also in the Alabama Hills, which is right there, beautiful spot. Then I went down to the Salton Sea and Slab City, and from there I went to Glamis Sand Dunes. I was there for like a week, beautiful place. Okay, and then from there I went over to Quartzsite, Arizona, and hung out with the Boondockers, really interesting people there. Then I went up to Lake Havasu City, Arizona, and then I went across back over to Joshua Tree, and now I am up in the mountains above LA. Beautiful place up here, and I know a great little spot up here. I'm going to pull off, and I'm going to give you guys a peek inside and give you guys a more in-depth look at what I bring with me on the road. Okay, so here we are at the rim of the world in the mountains above LA. Beautiful, magical spot. I come up here as often as I can. Just a fabulous place. Highly recommended. Let's take a look inside here, and I think you'll see what I'm talking about, that I just like to keep it real simple, real clean, no mess, no junk, and no clutter in here. Let's look at the back. Okay, there's not a lot in here. I have my trusty sleeping bag, which is a hugely important piece of gear. This is a North Face Superlight that I've had for, gosh, almost 20 years. It's a big down sleeping bag, and it just does the job wonderfully. I don't have a heater. I don't have a Propex heater or any kind of heat in this thing. And people are always asking me, oh man, do you have heat? How do you make it work without heat? Well, that big, huge sleeping bag. And honestly, I avoid places like, I don't go to places like Montana in the winter, right? In Wisconsin. You can see this is the middle of November, end of November, and this is where I am. I'm in the mountains outside of LA, and it is a little bit chilly. Okay, I don't know what the temperature is, but you can see I'm in a down, lightweight down jacket and my trusty ridiculous hat that keeps me very warm. Yeah, I'm not in Montana right now. There's a reason for that. I'm not in Wisconsin. I'm not in Michigan. Okay, some godforsaken place like that. I'm here in God's country in this beautiful spot, and the sun's out and it's gorgeous. But with that being said, I mean, I do go to some cold places from time to time. For example, when I was up at Mount Whitney, like I said, when that big cold front came through a couple weeks ago, I think. And if anybody was in the Western United States in November 2020, you'll remember that. It was so cold up at Mount Whitney. I was up at Whitney Portal. It was so cold that there was ice on the insides of these windows one morning when I woke up. Okay, but I was in this sleeping bag and I was toasty warm, and I got up in the morning and put my clothes on, stretched, got a little food, and I'm good to go. And I think the whole idea, one of the ideas of not having a heater is that it forces you to spend less time in here huddled by the heater and more time out in this, doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is connecting with all of this. Okay, that's a big reason why I don't have a heater. It forces you out of that sleeping bag, out of that van, and out into the world where you're supposed to be out doing stuff. Okay, and that's the whole point of having this van, of being out here doing this stuff, right? I mean, I would think. So yeah, that's my thoughts on heaters, and that's how I keep warm: a sleeping bag and clothes. Okay, food is a huge question. Okay, a huge part of that question, how do I stay out here and live out here almost indefinitely on these big trips? Food is a big part of that. What do you eat? How do you make that work? Okay, and the answer to that, again, is as simply as possible, as minimalist as possible. You can see I have some canned food up here. This is kind of for just emergencies. I almost never eat it. I call that my hunker down comfort food. Like if I'm ever, and so is this in here, for example. I have, the good old Chef Boyardee ravioli and some chili, and that is for if I'm ever in a place or in a situation where it's just nasty and I do have to hunker down in this thing and it's raining and nasty. There's nothing quite like a hot thing of Chef Boyardee of ravioli or some nice hot, piping hot chili. in those situations. And in those situations, I have this. I have my trusty backpacking stove, and I have a pot, and I also have a little tea kettle back there, and I can heat up some water for some mashed potatoes or some hot oatmeal or something like that. But I rarely cook. I rarely heat stuff up. Instead, I eat a lot of things like this, for example, is an oat and barley mix from the co-op. Any organic type co-op you happen to go by, they'll have a bulk food section. Stuff like this is wonderful. It's great. And I have that, and I mix it, with some milk, and I'm down the road. That's great food. And I have some tuna packets here for backpacking or for protein. Of course, since I am a guy traveling in my van, I wouldn't have my card. They wouldn't give me my van guy card if I didn't have granola, the requisite granola there. So that works well also. But yeah, food, I do it as simply as possible, mostly cold. And speaking of cold, up there is my cooler. Okay, and I'll show you that in a second. Let's walk around. We'll take a look at that. Oh, that reminds me, power. This is my 2 USB ports, and I have another outlet down here. This charges my iPad and my phone and headlamp, and my little headlamp right there, and that plugs in over here. Okay, and charges. Power is another thing I'll talk about in a minute in my battery setup. But for now, let's go back to the food. Keep going with that. This is my cheesy Coleman $20 Walmart cooler. Okay, I don't have a Yeti. I'm not cool enough to have a Yeti. I'm not a cool guy, so I don't have a Yeti. Big part of that is the minimalism aspect. Okay, it's the same idea. Just I don't want some fancy cooler in this thing, and a lot of that is if some greasy, grubby thief pokes his filthy head in this thing and looks in the window and sees a Yeti, that's just one more thing that's going to make him say, oh, I want that, and maybe he'll break in and take it. I don't need that in my life. So this thing works fine. It keeps ice well enough, and it's not going to attract any attention, and it's just fine for me. In that thing, that's the other part of my food system is I have, obviously I have some ice, and I usually carry some milk, a little half gallon of milk possibly, and some cheese, some sliced cheese, and some deli turkey or some other kind of protein for sandwiches. Okay, and I eat a lot of that, and that's the bulk of my meals. Another big thing, down here I have a paper bag with I usually carry that in the cooler, but I had more stuff in there because I was out farther into the backcountry, so I had to pack some more stuff. But I have a lot of organic kale and vegetables like carrots, and I have tomatoes, and I have things like that, fruits. I always try to get organic, and I use that for live, vital energy food. Okay, and it's wonderful. I eat a lot of that. Okay, so that's a big part of it. So there you go. So I have some canned foods in the back. I have some dry foods, and I have some cold foods, some milk and cheeses and stuff, and I have a lot of vegetables and fruits. And that's what I eat. Okay, every day. And occasionally I'll eat out. I'll get a burrito at a Mexican stand or something like that. But usually that's the stuff I eat right there. And you'll notice I don't have the kitchen unit in this. Okay, this is a Westphalia interior in this thing. When I bought this off a guy. It was a wrecked Westphalia. Okay, and all these cabinets. And I had the option of buying the kitchen unit that goes right there in the Westphalias. It has the stove and the fridge. And over here there's the water cabinet. Okay, there's another little cabinet for extra storage. And I declined on that. I said, no, I don't need that, okay? Because cooking in a van on trips like this, when you're living like this, is just kind of, a lot of people do it, and I think that's great if that's your thing, but for me, just that extra element of cooking and dealing with that, and washing pans and dealing with the steam rising up, and a big production like that, to me takes away from the experience. I think it really takes away from the experience that you're trying to have out here. And again, it's connecting with this. It's getting out into this. Okay, and for me, cooking in these things is one. That's one more thing that keeps you inside this instead of being out in this. Okay, you see what I mean? Does that make sense? So that's, yeah, that's kind of my answer on that. You know, I don't want to be inside this thing cooking. And frankly, when you're out doing this stuff, when you're out in this stuff, okay, doing your thing, you know, for example, me, I'm always out hiking, I'm biking, I'm running, like this guy right here, killing it. What's up, man? A little shy. And I do that stuff all day, and by the time I get back to this, I'm toast. You know, it's all I can do to eat a can of tuna fish and, you know, have a protein shake or something, and then I fall into bed and I'm out. Okay, and I don't have time to sit in this thing cooking. You know, I'm too busy out doing stuff. So that's kind of the answer on that. Let's see, what else? You'll notice I don't have a whole bunch of racks and batteries, and solar panels and bumpers and all this other GoWesty nonsense that people buy that weighs you down. That's kind of the same thing. It's kind of the minimalist thing. This thing, as I've said, is a turbo diesel. It gets 35 miles to the gallon. At best, you know, usually I kind of average about 33, and I'm up in the mountains like this, I'll get about 30. And I attribute that to not having a whole bunch of crap on it, both inside and on the outside. Okay, I don't have a bunch of stuff weighing me down, aerodynamic drag, you know, and whatever. And it's just, there's something appealing about having it lean and mean and clean and down the road. Okay, so that's why I don't have a bunch of stuff on it. For batteries, I said I was going to talk about battery and power, what I do for power, charging devices, this and that. I have the original single battery setup in this thing from the factory, okay? And I don't have solar panels, and it works great. I charge my iPad, I charge my computer, I charge my phone, I charge my drone, okay? And its batteries, which are actually pretty hungry. And what else do I charge? DSLR, stuff like that. It works great. You know, I don't have a solar panel, and that has worked fine for me. I just have a really good battery, and I watch my voltage levels, and that's it. I also, a big part of that is I have this LED lighting system, okay? I have a light right there, and I have two right here up on the ceiling that I hardly ever use because they're just, that one right there in the front just basically blows you out of here. It's so bright. And then back here, if I am cooking or if I'm doing something back here, I have this one up here on the hatch. Okay, this is just strip light. That's what I have in this thing. And it works wonderfully. It lights up the night. If I'm out boondocking, at a campground or something or whatever, I turn these lights on. There's so much light, it's ridiculous. People come up to me like, Jesus, man, turn that stuff off. It's too bright. And that's it. And every light on this thing is LED. There's not an incandescent bulb on this thing anymore. That includes the headlights, as you can see, and I have a driving light underneath there, an LED driving light. That's my high beam. Okay, there's a relay controlling that. I'll make a video on that later. I need to make a video showing you guys my lighting system. But that's it. So there it is. So again, the answer, what do I bring with me? As little as possible. Okay, and again, because I think stuff gets in the way of life. Okay, and I don't think that's a new idea. I think people are kind of aware of that already, and people are kind of going towards that recently. And I just kind of take it, I take that on the road with me. And I don't take a lot of stuff, and I spend less time in this thing and more time out in this stuff, doing the stuff that I do and connecting with all of this. And that's, again, that's why we do this, right?